Okay, this is a little different section. This is about answering members' questions. I actually think this is going to be a more effective way. So if you do have any specific questions, technical, practical, industrial, commercial, career-oriented, fire me them on an email and then I will bounce you back some answers. A couple of questions have come up from a couple of members. One is to do with what is the difference between a personalization and a personal object. Just to recap, a personal object is what we call an emotional memory exercise. An object is the thing we focus upon. The sound of that water is an object. If I choose to focus upon it, it becomes my object. Okay? A personal object is something I focus upon sensorially that produces strong emotional response. A personal object must produce strong emotional response. And we're talking about tears, sadness, grief, rage, real heightened aggression, power, anger, etc., or hysterical laughter. All right? An extreme emotional state. The hardest clearly is tears because it's the most intimate, it's the most vulnerable. So if you focus upon that object in your practice sensorially, that object will trigger strong emotional response regardless of any other context. Now, a personalization, however, is a person in your life that if you focus upon them sensorially, you hold their hand or you hear them talk or you see them in the kind of words or you hear them laugh, for instance, an evocative sense of them, it produces a sense of relationship. But that sense of relationship doesn't produce emotional response. It just produces a sense of social, personal interconnection. Now, if I use a personal object, a personalization, say my father, my mother, a nephew, a niece, right, in context to an imaginary given circumstance. So if I worked on the sense of my partner, for instance, and I was dealing with the scene where in the scene my character was having to deal with the separation from another character through divorce, for instance, if I took the truth of my own personal experiences, a personalization, and I mixed it up with an imaginary given circumstance, an imaginary suggestion, my psychology might start to process it as if it is genuinely happening, and thus I become potentially more emotional, more thoughtful, more needy, etc., etc. So again, personal object, exclusively in the chair, when you're working it, produces a specific ballpark result. Personalization creates a sense of relationship, which you can then evolve into the imaginary given circumstances of a scene, and thus you would listen and respond more logically to the perspective of the character. That's the difference between the two. Second question was about practice. Practice of tools and so forth. Practice is vitally important in anything. Language, music, a craft, a sports skill, right? Any of it. If you're not doing it on a repeated level, you will not evolve a relationship. Your brain will not actually grow so that becomes a more familiar relationship, and thus it will more readily be able to produce results, and hopefully successful results or playful results or creative results, etc. Practice is important, but the question in particular was about what amount of practice and how to practice. They wanted to exclusively work on basic relaxation and then do sense memory. Just to clarify, whenever you work in a chair sensorially, you must start with basic relaxation, but I would always suggest that you also go on to some form of sense memory. You do not need to know all the tools to do one sense memory exercise. All of you, it's the birds here, they're telling me something. All of you know something, even if it's the overall sensation, the hot bath, even if it's the breakfast drink. One of the important things is you're not just practicing to find the experiences that come alive in you when you work on something sensorily, you're also practicing the concentration. Repeating an exercise that doesn't necessarily have a psychologically interesting journey, but gives you a sense of relationship to an object that produces some consistent results, is the art of concentration. So smelling, seeing, tasting, touching, these are important, sensible sensory skills you need to evolve. You can also do this in your daily work. Your daily activities, drinking a cup of coffee, sitting in the sun, listening to a bird. All of these are about how do I learn to reconnect with my senses and experience the world initially through my senses rather than immediately run to my intellect, or to be numbing out from the world sensorially because I'm just trapped in my head processing a lot of information. So the practice is really important, but it must be in conjunction with some form of sense memory. Again, it's your target. you know what you're good at and you know what you're not being good at. So if you're not concentrating on asking specific questions, that's the practice for the day. If you're not actually really working with the body within the structure of the exercise, that's the practice that you primarily focus upon. If you can't necessarily find consistent results, then maybe that's something you can process upon. At some point, when the sense memory is having an effect upon you and you're in the chair, you need to open your eyes and you need to take in something around the world and see how it affects the change of relationship from it. If I just look at a tree, and I look at the tree right now, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. There's no real relationship to it. However, if I sense somebody who's really important in my life that I love very much, suddenly that tree becomes really significant to me. My sense of relationship is heightened, deepened, evolved. And if I imagine that I need to convince the tree to grow, right, so my character believes that that tree is the manifestation of their lost mother, then I would truly relate to that tree. So the text that the writer may have written comes out. So these things are all stages, these things are all evolutionary. But don't just try and kind of deconstruct them into one simple thing. Sense memory must be followed by some form of practice. Basic relaxation must be formed by some form of practice. Relaxing in itself is not purposeful because you're not relaxing enough to work. Relaxation is always about relaxing enough to work. Okay? Clearly you might want to get your head around basic relaxation, but if you just do basic relaxation, it falls back into therapy. You're doing basic relaxation to even just pick up a play and read it more openly. Okay? I hope those answer the questions. As I said, hey, listen, find me a question. Right? Send me a question on an email, and this, as I say, will be an effective way of communicating, because instead of you just getting the email, all right, or whatever the answer, everyone else can tune into the answer as well. All right? Thank you very much. Goodbye.